Hello, this is my reflection for anti-discrimination class 11, January 27th. This was a very special but also very intense class. A lot of stuff to think about. So I'll start by talking about the group presentations. The first group that presented on family involvement in schools, having meaningful engagement with families versus symbolic engagement, I thought was super interesting to talk about, like, what barriers to engagement there are and participation for families. I did my practicum at a very wealthy school, and they had a super active parent community and parent, like a lot of parent involvement. And I thought that it was pretty remarkable, and it is important that they made that connection between it, parents who have lots of time and can afford not to work, usually are the ones who can be active in school communities. So it's great to learn about ways that teachers and principals can include parents in involvement in the school and make them feel like an active participant in their child's learning journey. That parent involvement in high poverty schools is very important for reducing the poverty gap in education. So that's something really good to think about, and how principals in wealthier schools invest more time in parent involvement activities. That is absolutely what I saw in my practicum. So it'll be really interesting to move to my next practicum and see if there are any contrasts or how that looks. The next group presented on combating hate and racism in school, I thought was really important, but also devastating. Learning how 40% of Black students report experiencing racism in institutional settings, and that number goes up to 51% in other studies. Students experience racism in school and experience significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, stress, PTSD, especially among Black youth. And this is why this class is so important. Us as educators and teachers need to be able to stand up for students and support them. Students experiencing racism and other forms of systemic oppression, we need to be able to address and combat those issues, instead of the color blindness idea that these things don't exist or have already been solved, when so clearly we have the evidence that these issues still strongly, significantly impact students today. So I thought those numbers were really not shockingly high, but just so depressing, and such an important call to action for educators. Like, this is clearly an emergency, and the fact that teachers and guidance counselors assume Black students are less capable and held lower expectations for them, told them that they should quit or do lower level courses instead of supporting them. Like, the fact that these are issues that students are still facing is unbelievable. But I mean, believable, but like so significant, and it's really devastating that this is something that students are still dealing with. And it's so important that teacher candidates are learning about these things, and how racialized educators carry a significant amount of the unpaid labor in terms of educating other staff and supporting students experiencing racism. And this class is so important, especially for white and wealthier students, including myself, like this, it's so important to be exposed to other kinds of experiences in school, and how not everybody had the opportunities that we have in their educational experience and upbringing. And our class discussions, when Mary brought up Holocaust Remembrance Day and made the connections to what ICE is doing today, which are very real and a really important connection to make. And then another student made the point that the Holocaust should only be brought up on its own. It really struck me that if you don't teach children early on about what like the experiences of other people, and they are educated in a vacuum and only see other people who have experiences like theirs and stories like theirs and upbringings like theirs, I could imagine why they would grow up to think theirs is the only one, and the oppression of their people is the most important one, if that's the story that they're hearing again and again and again. So I'm really interested to learn more about how educators are fostering care and compassion in elementary students, and as early as possible, because I mean, we've spoken about this a lot. It's so clear that, unfortunately, you can teach all these things. You can teach about what people experience, but it's very possible that people will still not understand why it's important or care. And that's really interesting to see. I read the Combating Hate and Racism Student Learning Strategy, reading from the TDSB, with the 6 components of combating hate and racism for student learning strategy about classroom instruction, caregiver. Anyway, sorry, I'll save time. But I wonder if all of these are really being included and implemented in our own teacher college. Like, it doesn't. I think that the other courses we have do incorporate equity lens, and I think our anti-discrim class is so important, but it almost feels like the administration is doing it in a very performative way, and not with the imperative that it really requires. When you look at the statistics, like 51% of Black students are experiencing racism in school. That's something that needs to be really heavily stressed in, like, throughout our program. And the onus should not just be on this one course, but we shouldn't be able to graduate unless we can prove that we understand that these things are important. Because if we're just making more teachers who are perpetuating these systemic oppressions, that's a huge problem. So I propose that we all have to take an equity test and compassion test. Maybe it's an oral exam, but to show that we actually understand why we are learning about marginalized voices, why it's important to teach these things, how we will implement these things in our classroom, so that we can move beyond allyship and towards co-conspiratorship. But anyway, I will be discussing this with maybe the administration. But sorry, I'll finish it. I'm really glad that we went over the historical examples of cross-racial solidarity, and I did notice that the only one I could think of before I was learning was John Brown of the slave riots, but who was white, and it made me think that about, oh wow, the only example of cross-racial solidarity, or the first one that comes to mind, is of a white person. um, so definitely made me think, and it's great to have these different examples that I will be teaching in my class. Love the agreements that we went over, and yeah, the discussion on being cautious of performative allyship and ally theater. I wish that we had gone over these things earlier on in the semester, because I think that they are really important and integral for being a good educator, and I hope that we can all strive to be co-conspirators, because I will. And I really appreciate this class so much. Thank you for everything. Thank you, Mary and Nancy.